Now, you alluded to this earlier, Greg. A lot of Jokowi's compromises seem to speak against his notion of reform and his promise of reform, but also if we turn now to the case of the Bali Nine and the two Australians on death row, his decision not to grant clemency and go ahead with these executions as a matter of policy seemed to really speak against Jokowi's socially progressive promise and nature. What do you make of this decision to not even countenance clemency under any circumstances?
I think there's several possible interpretations, and some of it comes back to Jokowi's own personality, and indeed it's becoming increasingly clear how little we do know about what he really thinks. He gives very little of himself away in any of his public statements. There tend to be very anodyne things about his past, but as to his current thinking, his face has hardly any expression on it whenever he gives interviews, and particularly when he's talking about important things. So Yudhoyono, for example, if he was making a statement about something he felt strongly about, you would often see the emotion on his face. It was clear that this was something that meant a lot to him. But Jokowi looks much more impassive, so he's a difficult man to read, and it's hard to know whether he's experiencing any kind of inner turmoil about a decision, such as executing a dozen people or more. Having said that, I think it's also revealing about the politics. So Jokowi made this decision in the first month of his presidency. I think there's probably a lot of truth to what the Fairfax media has been reporting, that Jokowi didn't have anywhere near enough information in which to make these decisions at the time in which he made it, this blanket rejection of all clemency pleas. And he made that decision seemingly to look tough. You know, lots of observers have commented on this, at a time when he was already being criticised. I think his refusal to budge from that position is indicative of perhaps a more socially conservative attitude than we had imagined that he had. And so he may well indeed, as a matter of principle, find nothing to object to in the death penalty. I think there's a certain lack of intellectual engagement or philosophical engagement, perhaps even moral engagement with this issue as well. So there's plenty of information available that the figures that Jokowi is quoting for the death toll rising from hard drugs and for the number of Indonesians who are addicted to hard drugs is probably greatly inflated. They're certainly not reliable figures to be quoting day in, day out. Nonetheless, Jokowi continues to do so. He also hasn't in any way engaged with the debate about the effectiveness of the death penalty as a deterrent. And so the whole question of the efficacy of state execution of people, and if they execute the next batch of 12 or so, well, that'll bring to 18 people in a few months whose lives he has taken away, in effect. And he doesn't give any impression of being perturbed about that, or of going through an internal debate about whether this is justified. And he could easily leave those people in jail, because most of them, if their sentences are commuted, they've got life sentences. He could also stall the process. Many Indonesian presidents have done that. He didn't have to bring matters to the head in the way he's done, but he has done so, and I think it's not only for political reasons, but I think he himself believes that he should just act on this matter. So we're learning things about Jokowi as a result of this process. And for people who have a more progressive set of views, they're not particularly pleasant things.
Is there any chance that he will do a U-turn and change his decision? There's been a lot of agitation from Australia, particularly our Foreign Minister and Prime Minister, which undoubtedly is probably not helpful in the way it's been framed. But is there any chance that Jokowi might reverse his decision in this case?
I'm sorry to say I see almost zero prospect of him changing his attitude, partly because he has already made an emphatic public commitment to continue with the executions. He must be mindful of the kind of political flack that Yudhoyono copped when he showed leniency towards Chappelle Corby. So there's no votes for an Indonesian president to be seen to be soft on drug dealers, and there's probably a great deal of political harm. But moreover, I think Jokowi, he's not much concerned about what other countries think, and particularly Western countries. And that's also completely different from Yudhoyono, who was always preoccupied with Indonesia's international standing. So the kind of reputational harm that Indonesia has been suffering over these, and it's not just in Australia, it's in Brazil and the Netherlands and lots of other countries, and this will continue if he proceeds with the executions. I don't think that particularly worries Jokowi at all. He's a very domestically focused politician. He knows very little about international affairs, aside from some economic issues. And the whole business of diplomacy is something that's rather abstract to him. And I also think it does come back to the point that he probably doesn't see the death penalty as a bad thing. And he may well have what I take to be a rather simplistic view that the death penalty will indeed help to curb drugs. Now, I think if he really wanted to solve the problem of hard drug distribution in Indonesia, he would look at his own police force. There have been a number of police generals and other senior officers who've been charged and convicted for their involvement in drug business. There's a lot of media and other reporting and academic studies to show the heavy involvement in police in the drug industry, but he's not touching that. He's taking the easy option. So that is also somewhat contrary. No one expected he would confront the police and seek overnight change and withdrawal from these things. But what he could do is more purposefully support the measures that would gradually put very high disincentives on police officers becoming involved in not only drug trade but other forms of corruption, by empowering, you know, Anti-Corruption Commission, all sorts of other investigative agencies who might be looking at this. And that's what he's not doing. And so the core problem remains, I think, and killing foreigners who've been running drugs is not really going to have much impact on it at all.